Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're with us today because honestly, we are diving into an absolute masterpiece of modern musical theater. We're talking about Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine's 1986 classic, Into the Woods. Now, whether you know every single lyric by heart or you're just sort of familiar with the basic concept, this explainer is going to unpack exactly how this brilliant show completely upended the genre. I mean, Sondheim and Lapine didn't just retell gentle, soothing bedtime stories. No, they engineered this profound, almost violent collision between those familiar fairy tale tropes we all grew up with and deep, unsparing psychological realism. It is a story about desire, about grief, and ultimately, the incredibly heavy weight of the choices we make.
So, let's just jump right in by asking the core philosophical question of the whole show. What happens after Happily Ever After? It sounds simple, right? But this single question completely shatters our traditional, comfortable understanding of fairy tales. It's the central engine driving the entire narrative. We are so deeply conditioned to think that getting what we wish for is the finish line. You know, the curtain falls, the book closes, and the characters just freeze in the state of perfect eternal bliss. But Sondheim, he forces us to look at the messy day after the wedding. He makes us look at the exhausting morning after the giant is slain, and the harsh, unfiltered reality of living with the very things we thought we wanted.
Act 1, the fairy tale setup. We start off in a very familiar, comforting world, where classic characters enter the woods pursuing their deepest, simplest wishes. Cinderella just wants to go to the king's festival. Jack wants wealth to save his starving cow. Little Red Riding Hood just wants to visit her grandmother. And right at the center of all this, we have the baker and his wife, just ordinary people who simply want to have a child.
But of course, there's a catch, and this is how Sondheim so ingeniously connects all these separate stories. The baker and his wife find out their family has been cursed with childlessness by their neighbor, who happens to be a powerful, morally ambiguous witch. To break the spell, they have to venture into the woods and bring her 4 highly specific items: a cow as white as milk, a cape as red as blood, hair as yellow as corn, and a slipper as pure as gold. This crazy scavenger hunt is the mechanical engine of the plot. It forces the baker and his wife to constantly cross paths with Jack, Little Red, Rapunzel, and Cinderella, driving everyone deeper into the woods and ultimately much deeper into each other's lives.
And honestly, for a while, it works exactly like we expected to. We get that classic fairy tale closure. As they navigate the woods, everyone actually seems to get what they want. Cinderella marries her prince. Jack steals the giant's gold and gets rich. Little Red survives the wolf. Rapunzel gets out of her tower. And the baker and his wife finally get their child. Act 1 ends with this unblemished, picture-perfect happiness. It's brilliant because it completely lulls the audience into a false sense of traditional security. We literally sit there thinking, okay, great, the story's over.
Then, boom, right after intermission, we get this massive structural whiplash. The story goes straight from that neat fairy tale closure into total, absolute moral collapse. The genre just abruptly shifts. It transforms from a lighthearted fantasy into a staggeringly dark, high-stakes moral drama. The community completely breaks down, characters start aggressively blaming each other, they betray one another, and they totally abandon their lofty ideals. All those perfect, neatly tied endings from Act 1, they unravel at a terrifying speed.
So what actually triggers all this chaos? Well, Act 2 introduces a new threat, a second giant. Specifically, this is the angry wife of the giant that Jack killed for his wealth back in Act 1. She climbs down from the sky seeking revenge and just violently destroys the kingdom. But here's the thing, the giant isn't just a monster they need to slay. She is a literal consequence of their earlier actions coming back to haunt them. She is this massive, powerful metaphor for accountability. Suddenly, these characters are forced to deal with the devastating real-world fallout of their unchecked desires and the casual little thefts they committed just to get their happy endings.
And this brings us to such a brilliant, heartbreaking realization of that moral collapse. In Act 2, the baker's wife, who remember was so practical and driven in Act 1, experiences this massive identity crisis. Right in the middle of all the chaos, she has a brief, shocking romantic encounter with Cinderella's prince. It's a stunning moment for the audience because it reveals this very ordinary, messy human weakness in a setting where we've been taught to expect purity. During her incredible song Moments in the Woods, she realizes that life is made of complicated choices, not perfect answers. People are flawed. And shortly after having this profound realization, she dies suddenly. It completely reinforces the harsh, brutal unpredictability of real life.
Which brings us to thematic deconstruction, rejecting simple morality. Sondheim essentially takes a sledgehammer to the idea that there are simple heroes or simple villains. Instead, we watch good people make terrible mistakes.
They lie, they cheat, and they face sudden, devastating tragedies. In this universe, absolutely no one is purely innocent, not even the characters we've grown up idolizing.
You can really see this when you look at how the surviving characters shed their two-dimensional fairy tale personas. They become these incredibly messy representations of psychological realism. Look at the baker. He's not some dashing hero. He's flawed, he's uncertain, he represents ordinary humanity. Cinderella is totally indecisive. Unlike the traditional versions, she's constantly asking what she really wants, making her arc all about self-knowledge. Jack isn't just a brave kid. His actions unintentionally trigger a literal catastrophe, representing childish impulsiveness. And Little Red goes from totally naive to deeply hardened after surviving the wolf, representing the painful loss of innocence.
But wait, alongside all that moral ambiguity, there is another massive layer here: parenthood. The musical explores it from so many different angles. We see the immense damage of overprotection through the witch, who literally locks Rapunzel in a tower to keep her safe from the world, which only ends up pushing her away. We see the baker wrestling with the deep trauma of being abandoned by his own father. And because of that, we witness his profound, paralyzing fear of his own fatherhood. The show is constantly asking us, what do parents truly owe their children, and how much control is simply too much?
So, all of this really hinges on understanding the title itself, The Woods. They aren't just literal trees, right? They are a metaphor for life itself. They represent uncertainty, moral confusion, and the dangerous, absolute necessity of growing up. Everyone enters the woods seeking something, but nobody leaves the same. You walk in as one person, and through the trials, the terrors, and the traumas of the woods, you experience a profound, irreversible transformation.
And the culmination of that transformation brings us to maybe the most powerful message of the whole show. Children will listen. It's a breathtaking moment that cements the theme of legacy. The characters finally realize that children absorb what adults do, not just what they say. It perfectly illustrates the profound, lasting responsibility that adults have toward the next generation. The choices you make, the corners you cut to get your wish, the way you handle tragedy, the children are watching it all, and they are learning from it.
So, how do they actually pick up the pieces of their broken world? Well, first, the giant is finally defeated. But they don't just go back to their original lives. Actually, scratch that, they can't go back. The survivors, the baker, Cinderella, Little Red, and Jack, have all lost their original families. So what do? They form a new, chosen family. They recognize their interdependence and their shared responsibility to each other. And in a really beautiful moment, the baker finally accepts his role in fatherhood, deciding to care for his child and the other orphans. And here is the ultimate takeaway of Into the Woods. Getting what you want is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of responsibility. This resolution is just so much more mature and realistic than a standard fairy tale. It doesn't promise some naive, guaranteed perfection. It promises resilience. It promises continued effort. Wish fulfillment does not guarantee happiness. The real work actually begins after the wish is granted.
So I want to leave you with a question today, one that Sondheim deliberately leaves hanging in the air. Will this new, chosen family truly do better than the previous generations? And can the immense trauma they've endured in the woods ever be fully overcome? The ending is hopeful, for sure, but it's not naive. Life doesn't just end with happily ever after. It continues day after day in uncertainty, loss, love, and choice. So the next time you find yourself wandering into the woods of your own life, ask yourself, what legacy are you leaving for those who are listening? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.